The greatest gaming mouse of all time, the one that has won the most tournaments, that has sold the most and has been loved by the most professional gamers, now has a V2. It's here, the G Pro X Superlight V2. Wait, not this one, it's this one. It's here, the G Pro X Superlight V2, 4 years in the making, to immense amounts of hype. It has to be very different and exciting, right? It was released to a lot of disappointment because not much has changed in the V2 actually. So what are the changes? And I think more importantly for a lot of people, what's the point? Starting off with the feel in the hand. It's identical. Yes, the G Pro X Superlight V2 is 2 to 3 grams lighter, but it has the same exact shape and same exact size, which means it's gonna work for the same exact audience. No changes here. Now, I personally don't mind this all that much since the G Pro X Superlight does have a very nice shape for claw grip users. Really, for anyone with 18 cm long to 21, 22 cm long hands, the G Pro X Superlight has a claw grip shape that performs phenomenal. The build quality is exactly the same, but there are some slight changes here and there. For one, the logo on the bottom has been rotated. What a massive difference. And the side thumb buttons have been slightly improved in my opinion. They are stiffer in terms of bottom mount, and they have less squishy, spongy post travel. The scroll wheel is also a little quieter and a little bit more stiff, but apart from that, there's no massive physical difference. It also has a bigger cutout on the bottom for your bigger dongle. The mice feet is still the same material as the original G Pro X Superlights, but the shape has been changed ever so slightly, so if you have pre-existing glass feet that you want to reuse or whatever, you can't. However, the biggest change you can feel with the G Pro X Superlight V2 are the clicks. They've been changed from mechanical switches, which were Omrons, to opto-mechanical switches. That's to say, hybrid switches that are both optical and mechanical. Now, as far as optical switches go, these are actually some of the best I have tried. A lot of the optical switches you can get on Lamzu, Pulsar, Razer these days, they don't feel like the mechanical switches they're replacing. They've got too much treble, they've got a very low-pitched sound, they're kind of clunky in terms of the actuation, so they kind of have that ching-ching kind of sound to them and feel to them, and they take a bit of getting used to. These actually manage to retain most of the character of the Omron switches it replaces, which means it's very easy to get used to coming from a mechanical switch mouse, that is to say, most people. It's still sharp, it's still crisp, it still has a very minimal travel and actuation distance, and it feels very similar to the Omrons it replaces in a great way. There is a couple of slight differences. It sounds a little clunkier, there's a bit of a metallic ting to it, and there is a little bit more of a snappier feel and a bit more travel than on the original Omrons. But the difference is much less than, say, on Razer. In my opinion, when it comes to mouse switches, the feel is more important than the performance. Not to say that the performance of these switches are bad. Now, I think a large reason as to why it retains a lot of its character is its hybrid nature. It can run in both optical mode or mechanical mode, so the mechanism isn't too different from the Omrons it replaces. And in mechanical mode, you can run it if you want to save power and have a longer battery life. It comes with all the disadvantages of mechanical switches. That is to say, a higher click latency than the optical mode on this switch, and because it's a mechanical switch, its delay will increase further as time goes on to prevent double clicking, an issue that optical switches just simply don't have. I personally would recommend you run this mouse with the optical switch mode enabled, since it performs better and the battery life is not bad with it on anyway. It's just a little less. In terms of click latency performance, I'm not going to come out here and say that I have an Nvidia LDAP to do such tests, but from basically every other reviewer that is reputable, BetCTech and a bunch of others, the click latency of the mouse at 2000 Hz polling rate is about the same as most of the 4000 Hz polling rate mice out there, or at least within a small enough gap that it's not significant enough to truly matter. And yes, this mouse can now operate in 2000 Hz polling rate with its slightly bigger dongle. Compared to 1000 Hz polling polling rate on the G Pro X Superlight, it is slightly noticeable. I had kind of like a 70% success rate at guessing whether this mouse was in 1000Hz or 2000Hz with a blind A/B test that my friend helped me do. And that's with a 500Hz display. So I think if you're gaming on 240Hz or below, you're really not going to notice the difference between 1000Hz and 2000Hz. It's definitely not as noticeable as going from 1000Hz to 8000Hz on the Viper Mini Signature Edition. But if you buy the V2, you might as well run it at 2000Hz even with the lower battery life because paid for that feature. And it does give you actual objective performance improvement even if you subjectively cannot feel it as much. My personal issue with this is that it's only 2000Hz. If you're gonna go with the spec sheet objective data bump, you might as well push it all the way to 4000Hz or 8000Hz to be competitive with the rest of the industry. 2000Hz is a nice improvement. And yes, there is diminishing returns going from 2000 to 4000 or 4000 to 8000, especially at the cost of battery life. But it's still nice to have as a feature, even if it's not on by default, even if there might be certain issues with higher polling rate. Logitech didn't explain why they didn't put 4K Hz or 8K Hz on this mouse, and I'm confident they were able to, but they probably had certain reasons like, oh, battery life or connection stability. Anyway though, sensor and wireless latency performance of this mouse would be perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. It's not going to make or break whether you're a good player. But if you're on the high end, you're esports professional, or you're really high ranked, high level gaming, that extra little bit of performance, however placebo effect it might be, is a nice to have. And this 2000Hz polling rate comes with an upgrade in the sensor as well. It's got a higher max tracking speed and it's marginally better in terms of resolution, all of which is stuff you cannot notice in real world use. It does have two interesting software features though. You can calibrate the sensitivity of your sensor to exactly match another gaming mouse that you have plugged in, regardless of DPI deviation. And there is adjustable lift-off distance, which is a feature that has been around before, but has been missing for quite a while now, so it's nice to see come back. So then, should you buy the G Pro X Superlight V2, and was there even a point to this release? Well, if you're coming from a G Pro X Superlight and your Superlight is still working perfectly fine, unlike mine, which has been dropped one too many times, then no, don't upgrade to the V2, at least not yet. However, if you're coming from a G Pro X Superlight V1 and it's broken, so it's time for like a replacement, V2 is a nice upgrade. The optical switches will give you better longevity, the 2000Hz is a nice performance bump, and the added software features are a nice to have. You could save some money, especially with all the V1s on sale, just getting another V1. But the V2 is nice if you're already used to the V1 and you want something slightly better. I think it gets more complicated if you're coming from another brand of mice or just another model of mice. If you're coming in knowing that you like the G Pro X Superlight shape, then just get the V2. It has better specs and it's upgraded, which is nice. But if you're coming in completely blind, like you have no idea whether you like the G Pro X shape or not, you're basically risking 120 or 160 USD, just get the V1. Because shape is king, and it's more important to have the right shape. And I personally would say if it's a unknown for you, whether you like the shape or not, just get the V1. You're not going to have a significantly worse experience going with it, and you're risking less. And that leads us to the final question. Was there a point to the Superlight V2? Yes, but it's still disappointing. Let me explain. Some people argue that it shouldn't be given the V2 moniker because the changes were too minimal to justify it being a Superlight V2. But I think it's better they called it the Superlight V2 than change the name for a massive model upgrade like calling it the Ultralight, which is what they did with models before the G Pro X Superlight. So calling it a V2 is actually calling it a smaller upgrade than previous generations. And it does have enough changes to actually justify being called the V2. It's not significant enough to really be earth-shattering and exciting, but it's still significant enough to justify the V2 name. It's also been 4 years since the launch of the G Pro X Superlight, so not calling it at least a V2 is a marketing failure for Logitech. That being said though, I think it's still justifiable to be disappointed about this mouse, and I absolutely am. I like the G Pro X Superlight, and I was kind of disappointed when I saw the spec sheet for this as well. It's a good mouse still, don't get me twisted. Considering there was a whole 4-year wait for this release, it was really underwhelming. I mean, You waited 4 years for USB-C and a bunch of features that other people already had released a year ago. As a fan of the G Pro X, who wants Logitech to release a top-tier mouse that just completely shakes up and revolutionizes the market, like with all 3 of its predecessors, I am underwhelmed. The G Pro X, G Pro X Superlight, and G Pro Wireless caused paradigm shifts every time it arrived. The V2 just kind of meets the market trends and doesn't really go significantly above and beyond in pushing the boundaries like Logitech claims to do all the time and actually did for the last 6 years with its 3 predecessors. So hence the disappointment. But then again, you also have to think of it from Logitech's perspective. They probably consulted with a lot of professionals when they were designing the V2. Their claim was that this mouse couldn't go much lighter since professionals do not want a mouse much lighter than 60 grams. I can see why. Professionals have muscle memory, and having a much lighter mouse is something that requires a lot of getting used to. Also, Logitech is in a position of dominance. The G Pro X Superlight is the most popular wireless gaming mouse to this day. And yes, it's lost some market share thanks to a lot of its competition coming up and catching up. Bamzu, Pulsar, Logitech, etc. But it's still the dominant king. And if Logitech changed too much of this mouse beyond technical, objective spec upgrades, they stand to alienate a lot of their existing audience, which they already have. I think Logitech's strategy here was just to release a V2, bumped the specs to modern levels so it will remain competitive with its competition, so that people who are already on the G Pro X Superlight have something to upgrade to instead of looking elsewhere for the latest and greatest specs. Logitech is a company renowned for pushing the boundaries and releasing exciting features. They always want to do it right. They're kind of Apple-esque in that way, but they also almost always figure out how to push the boundaries while doing it right. My personal opinion though is that Logitech just did a Zowie. They were kings of the market, they were dominating, so let's just not do too much. Just be somewhat competitive. That's good enough. Anyways, subscribe.